Okay, Peter, am I going to come to you next?
Okay.
They're deadly, just be careful there.
Don't start the clock till I get up there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The time it'll take him to get up here. You better stay up here now you've got up here.
Yeah.
Don't go anywhere. Peter and I had a chat about kind of topic that you might want to touch on, and because I know that Peter's been very concerned indeed about level of race hate following the Brexit vote and religious hatred, I wondered whether you might be willing to touch upon that. So I asked you if you'd come along and say a few words about that particularly contentious issue.
Yeah, okay. Right, yeah, okay, it's entitled Post-Brexit Racism. But in order to evaluate post-Brexit racism, it's necessary to go back much further than Brexit to understand the root causes of racism in Britain. Britain has always been attractive to migrants, partly because of our imperial history, but also because Britain has traditionally enjoyed very high standard of living in global terms. Generalising broadly, which is always a very dangerous thing to do, but I've only got 5 minutes, it's possible to identify key events in recent history which have attracted migrants to this country. After World War II, there was a severe labour shortage in the UK, and there was a marked increase in immigration. Many came from the Caribbean, where the West Indians found work in the transport and health sectors when they came here. Many immigrants of Asian origin settled in the northern mill towns in order to keep the cotton mills supplied with labour. Having attracted significant numbers of migrants to this country and granted British citizenship to all Commonwealth citizens by way of the 1948 British Nationality Act, the 1980s saw a change of government policy towards immigration and workers in general. Thatcher took power in 1979 and swept away many of the traditional northern industries and introduced draconian anti-union legislation. This process was continued by later governments, so that today, for example, something like 60% of the children of Burnley live in poverty. Successive governments have done very little to stave off the effects of high levels of unemployment and low levels of career opportunity. So some of these large towns with relatively high populations of BAME residents are also full of social deprivation. These are the seedbeds of racial intolerance, and it has been no surprise to see the BNP having some considerable electoral success in towns like Burnley. Government talking the talk of racism has not helped at all. Gordon Brown's faux pas when he called Maureen Duffy a bigot, quite rightly in my opinion, when the microphones were still switched on during the 2010 general election campaign, gave him little choice but to apologise. He had, a year previously, come out with the British Jobs for British Workers slogan, showing a dangerous triangulation with fascists, and the reality was that he and his predecessors had abandoned the former Labour Party's strongholds to their fates by failing to provide the necessary worthwhile jobs and life opportunities. By contrast to Burnley, Richmond Park, which of course has been in the news recently, the constituency there also has similar levels of residents of Asian origin, but because there is a very high level of employment in high-paid jobs in southwest London, there is no comparable level of racial tension, and of course they kicked the racist out when he went for re-election. So we have large swathes of the population in the more deprived areas of this country who are under the impression that the presence of significant number of non-white residents in their areas is the chief cause of the lack of job opportunities. These are the very seedbeds of fascism, and it is therefore no surprise that fascists in the form of Nick Griffin and Nigel Farage see the chance to exercise their grubby opportunism with ostentatious support from the gutter press and the BBC. And of course the press are utterly complicit in the promotion of racism, and with it the rise of fascism. We are constantly being bombarded by headlines from the Mail, the Sun and the rest of the gutter press demeaning and dehumanising desperate people from countries where they would risk death if they stayed. They are the front line of the radicalisation of the far right. It was absolutely no coincidence that the very same day that Farage stood in front of a poster lifted straight out of Nazi Germany, talking of breaking point, that a fascist in Yorkshire murdered a well-respected and well-loved MP. It's worth comparing terrorist murders by white fascists to those by black Islamists. The butchering of Joe Cox was very similar in many ways to that of Lee Rigby, but it was only the latter which prompted the then Prime Minister David Cameron to call a meeting of COBRA, the government's Cabinet Emergency Committee. One was seen as a threat to national security, the other was the work of a lone wolf and therefore to be dismissed as unfortunate. But the truth is this. If Islamic preachers are to be prosecuted for inciting hate crimes, then so should Paul Dacre and Rupert Murdoch. The problem with conceding political grounds to fascists is that there is no end to their demands. We have always seen political parties pinching each other's ideas, and that is always likely to continue. There is a difference, for example, between Jeremy Corbyn nicking the Greens' ideas concerning the link between petrol and diesel car use and high levels of respiratory disease, and Theresa May wearing UKIP's clothes. The difference is that the Greens' policies are by and large a result of consensus built around well-established scientific facts and opinions, and UKIP's are mostly the result of unjustifiable prejudice to which there is never any end. After all, we've all had enough of experts. It is therefore no surprise to see a worrying increase in racially motivated crimes in this country. We even hear a senior Conservative in the senior Conservative in the form of Crispin Blunt describing the Commons or our EU partners as the enemy. And to find our political discourse reduced to this level in the space of a few short months is desperately worrying.
Very good. Okay. Questions, please, and points. Anybody want to challenge Peter in a contentious talk, that one? Please, two hands up here. Gentleman closest to the front here.
Firstly, I'm Dave from the South Essex Headler. On the point of Brexit racism, I think what's happening is it's not a new wave of racism emerging, it's the old racists who feel more confident about going out there and spouting their bias. I think 10 years ago we probably could have kidded ourselves that yes, we've beaten racism, yes, we can, we've beaten the BNP off the streets and beaten them electorally. I think we were deluding ourselves, and I think, the point I want to make is we have actually got a very tough fight in our hands. And I think a lot of that just goes right back into history, the history of British Empire, and how the Empire actually, spoils of Empire, did actually fund enough welfare reforms as basically by the working class. So the point I want to make is, yeah, the racism is not new, it's always been there, it's re-emerging, but I think we have to go a little bit back in history, just challenge some of the established norms about the British Empire and see where that goes. Probably make us very unpopular, but...
Peter, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think racism has always been there, but you're bound to see it far more in places where deprivation exists. I mean, I'll give you a very sort of strong example. As it happened, was this woman from Burnley? I was up in a hostel in Yorkshire in January this year. I was with a load of friends, and we'd gone there basically to do a little bit of cycling and enjoy ourselves. And there was only one other person in this hostel. She was a lovely woman, woman I suppose in her late 50s, early 60s, and absolutely good fun. And suddenly it got onto race, and she's changed completely. And there was no way that sort of most of us, I think, were sort of fairly sort of middle class stuff, and there's no way we could contradict her, because her experience was such that she gets spat on by the Pakistani kids who she gets on the bus with, and if that's her experience, who am I to contradict her? But it's there, and these are the sort of people that the deprivation that successive governments have caused by neglecting those areas that used to be properly working class areas with industry, which, okay, they were hard damn jobs, but people could grow into those jobs being proud of what they did. That's gone. And that is where social cohesion breaks down.
There was, I'm not sure if it was the lady there at the back who put your hand up, was it?
No, that's
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Nigel and then Liz.
Basically, actually that book I read, I found a book dated 1953, recipe books, and they're talking about curry. Now, in 1953, it sort of says, well, you can find some of the ingredients from specialist importers of curries. Now, in my lifetime, we've had the Ugandan agents come over, we've had so many different groups coming over, but they have really helped our community. We have, every street corner's got a curry store, or there's a kebab shop or something. When I was a kid growing up in the 50s, the best we could ever hope for was fish and chips, probably once a week, frying tonight. But today, anybody can just walk out the door and go and buy instant food. And it's not the best. I know it's not the best, but it's bloody food. And, you know, curries and all the different... I walked out of school when I was in class 15 in 1963 and got a job in town. And one of the wonders about that was the food. Little mama and papa Italian places and stuff like that. And this is... I can't understand people who don't want to be cosmopolitan.
It enriches, your argument is it enriches our lives. Peter, do you want to chip in? But I must come to Liz.
Yeah, I'll refer you to an article in yesterday's Guardian, actually, by a guy called Daniel Barenboim. I don't know if you're familiar with the name. International concert pianist and conductor. Now, he runs an orchestra called the East-West Divan Orchestra, in which he deliberately takes youths out of Israel and Palestine and makes them work together as an orchestra, and it's a fantastic setup. And he talks about, and I was very impressed with his argument. He said, no, you don't want tolerance, because tolerance immediately it gives the implication of master and servant. You want acceptance and you want cohesion, and you don't get that with the sort of thing we've got at the moment.
Actually, my question was about tolerance. It was about the word tolerance, and you mentioned it. I was going to ask you about language and the language we use, because the word tolerance comes up if anyone's familiar with the PREVENT strategy. Mm-hmm. So anyone at work who's got to use embedding British values in their work, which I do in education, we use the word tolerant. And there are other words that are problematic, but it is very problematic, isn't it? Because to tolerate something implies it's okay not to like something, but you've got to put up with it. And I find in a lot of recent government jargon, words like that are seeping in. It's like, you don't have to like Johnny Foreigner, you just have to put up with him. You know, and I'm noticing that a lot, and I think it's feeding a lot of the racist values.
So it's not acceptance. Tolerance doesn't mean acceptance.
Well, tolerance means to tolerate something. I can tolerate someone I really dislike.
I think we probably...
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, the example will be, I mean, we all tolerate our children because we've got no choice. But the children have absolutely no choice but to tolerate us. They're stuck with us to come what may. Yeah. It's not a level playing field, is it? The tolerance relationship.
Okay. Thank you very much.